Let's go to record or go live. All right, welcome to 5Live Free Code School. It'll probably just be me and Alexander tonight. I'm hoping to see Sudesh show up. Jonas is still dealing with some illness, and Dana's got an engagement for the evening, so that's fine though. I'll catch up on this. We're gonna have a lot of fun today. We're gonna start building an actual application using very common technology that you'll see in use in production out in the real world. We're going to build it in JavaScript, and it's going to be an application that'll sit on a web server, and its function will be to be an API where we can send requests to it to cause things to happen with customers, products, orders, and addresses, that sort of thing. We'll build some of it, won't build the whole thing, just because we want to kind of at least go through the general principles involved. We may not finish the entire application, is all I'm saying. I want to start with just a review of some HTTP concepts. Have you ever heard of HTTP verbs?
Like requests and response and like posts and stuff like that? Or...
Yeah, it's right in that area, exactly. Specifically, when you're sending a request in, it's just a text document. We've seen a few examples, and we see plenty probably tonight. But when you send it in, it's meant to arrive at a web server. Like most often, it's a browser like Chrome or whatever, and it just sends this text document over the internet, and it arrives at a web server. And it contains everything that's needed for the web server to accomplish a specific task. We'll take the most rudimentary thing, which is I want to see a specific web page, right? In order for that to happen, you would want to contact the exact right web server, and you would want to let the web server know what you want to do, which is in this case is to retrieve a specific thing that the web server has, and you want to let it know where to find it on itself. Hey, Mr. Web Server, I was told that this exact location in your file directory that you have a specific file. It's an HTML file. Can you please send that to me? And that would look like this. Let me go ahead and pull up. I haven't pulled up Notepad++ in a while. Let's turn that on. And I'll share my screen. So the request would look like this. This is an HTTP request. You would put this thing I'm talking about called a verb, which is the type of action you'd like to happen on the web server. And then you'd have to put what protocol is to be used. Is it HTTP or HTTPS? And then you put slash. Actually, I'm getting that wrong. I want to get it exactly right. So here's your protocol, right? And the next thing is, okay, how do I locate the actual web server? And so you're going to want to put the location of the web server, which includes its domain, worldwideweb.example.com. There's the web server. Now, there's a more precise or numeric designation for the web server. It's its IP or Internet Protocol address, but we don't use those very often when we're sending requests. And now that you've located the exact right server, now you want to tell the server what it is you want and maybe even how to locate it. So you might give it a location path to file. So that would be like 3 different directories. It might be a directory that's called www/myapp/main site. but it's a path to the folder to whatever you want. And then you would have example.html. This is saying, hey, you have apparently, Mr. Web Server, in your file directory at this exact location right here. You have a file, I think, called example.html. At least that's what I was told. That's what this link that I'm clicking on says. Can you please obtain that file? And can you get it for me? So there's a bit more information you might want to send with the request. There's different specifications for the HTML language. So you might want, or sorry, for the HTTP protocol. So you might want to tell it which version of HTTP you want. There's only really two in common use out in the world, version 1.1 and version 2. You don't need to get very deep in that, but it's the thing you could specify. So right there, that is a completely valid HTTP request. Let's look at a real example. If I pull up a really nice resource for learning about this. Where'd you go? All right. So this is a website right here, called JSON Placeholder. Is super valuable. It's a fake API. So this outfit just maintains a web server out there with an API that they built that you can practice all of your skills as you learn this for free. It's pretty cool. We're going to look at this guide right here, and we're going to look at a very specific, how could I get something? And we're going to take this content. I'm going to come back over here and just look at it in text without having to deal with, oh, what happened to here? All right. Oh, I must have dragged something from the web into here and I just copied it. So let's replace this. And let's just analyze what we're looking at here. So this is totally valid hypertext transfer protocol request that we could send with any program capable of sending HTTP requests, like a browser or another utility. And we're going to use another utility here in a moment. And again, the first thing you're going to tell the web server, because remember, this whole bit of text on line 5 is going to get sent to a web server. You're going to tell it what verb it should apply. There's 7 of them you use commonly: get, post, put, delete, patch, that sort of thing. And we want it to get a specific resource. This first part, right? Let me outline or highlight. This again is the protocol we're going to use, the secure version of the hypertext transfer protocol. This is the domain, i.e., how do I find the specific exact web server? It's out there at this website called jsonplaceholder.typecode.com. And this is a path to the exact specific resource. Now, what's different here, it's not asking for a specific HTML file. You can see that, right? What it's doing instead is it's saying, hey, listen, take this text right here, the part that's highlighted, posts/1. And Mr. API, Mr. Computer Program that I'm sending this to, I was told that what that means is that you will go and look inside your database where you have a collection of blog posts, and you'll identify the blog post that has an ID of 1, and you'll send that blog post back to me. And you can see that documentation right here. It's called getting a resource. Now, a resource is an internet protocol and HTTP term. It basically means anything you can access over the internet: a web page, a video file, a sound file, an image file, or any of the things that various computer programs you can connect to work with: a product, a customer, an order, these kinds of things. Those are all resources. It's a nice, big, wide open generic term for if I can access it in any way over the internet, let's call it a resource. So in this case, the resource we're concerned with is a resource of a post, a blog post. And we've seen here that if we send a GET to this exact uniform resource locator, URL, it should send me back whatever blog post has an ID of 1. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, good. Let's test this. Do you have a program on your computer called, wow, I really do need more coffee. I can't believe Postman. Do you have Postman on your computer?
Yeah.
Good, excellent. Go ahead and start Postman. Have you used it before?
Briefly, but yeah.
I think I have Postman. There it is. Okay, yeah. So we're going to start up Postman.
Okay.
And let me. This is a little more. No, I don't want to have the update right now. Okay. So let's look right here at what we're about to do. And this will let us create HTTP requests and send them in. You create it by first, just like we did in text, picking the verb. Now, there's a lot of verbs, but like I said, there's about 6 or 7 of them we use all the time. We know we want to get verb. And then we even typed in our URL. Let's go and type that in ourselves. https://www.json placeholder.typicode.com. Let me know when you're caught up. You probably already are. You're pretty quick.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we said that the path to the resource is the text posts / and then the ID of the resource that we want. Now, if we click send here, it's actually going to send this text, this whole thing, to this web server right here. Then send it. I think I got the URL wrong. JSON. There's no www in it. Take out the www. Send it. Did you get that same result?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we have this nice GUI provided by the program called Postman. But the thing I want to stress here is the utter simplicity of what's happening behind the scenes. We're sending over the wire, i.e. via the connections of the internet. We're sending from machine to machine, just a text document. And the text document we're sending is this, line 5. That's all we're sending. And what we're getting back is an HTTP response. Now, this is kind of friendly. I kind of like it a little bit, okay? Notice that the response is formatted as JSON, JavaScript object notation. It's just a collection of key value pairs. This shows whatever the user is that made this blog post. This is the ID of the blog post itself. This is the title of the blog post, and this is the actual content of the blog post. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. Well, I want to get a little bit closer to those text documents. So let's use a neat little utility I've shown you, I think, once or twice before in VS Code that can also send HTTP requests. You're in complex.js, right? Or complex.js, right?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and collapse everything. And we're going to add a file in here just for the heck of it. So at the bottom here, so it's at the root of the project, do new
Mhm.
file. And we'll call this requests, or maybe spell it right, Eric. .http. Now, want to make sure that the correct extension is added. So go here to extensions, the little blocks.
Okay.
And search for REST space client. Do you have that installed already?
Yeah.
Good, excellent. I thought we may have used this a little bit. Okay. Close everything up here. Close all these files, or tabs, I mean. Close your terminal. I just want a nice, clean space. Now, ignore all the rest of this project. I just needed somewhere to put this file. We're just going to pay attention to this exact file right here. What this cool little extension lets us do is the same kind of thing that we were doing with that big, complicated program Postman, but it's a little more clean. We can create and send HTTP requests. All you have to do is write them in this file right here. And if you properly format them, then this REST client extension will figure out that it's an actual HTTP request, and it'll let you run it. It'll let you send it. So the way you do comments here is 3 squares. That's just the developer of this REST client extension decided that's how to do comments. And so we'll do a simple get of a blog post resource. And now we're literally going to do what we did here. Type it out again so you get used to it. We'll do the verb. And is it secure or not? It is, okay. JSON placeholder. You can tell I've done this before. typeacode.com/posts/1. So again, that's the HTTP verb of get, the version of the protocol to use, regular or secure, the domain where the web server is located, and the path to the exact resource that we want to, in this case, get. What's the next thing we can specify if we want to? Do you recall?
It was like what HTTP version? Like
Yeah.
Okay.
And notice what's kind of cool about this little extension that this dude made is it even does a little bit of color coding here. That's kind of friendly. Now, you'll also notice this little space between line 2 and line 3 that appeared. And if you roll over it, you have a clickable link. When you click on that, the REST client will actually grab this text and try to send it. It'll read through, it'll get the actual domain, and it'll try to send the entire text to that domain. Go ahead and click on it. Did you get that same result?
Yeah.
Good. So that's pretty similar in some ways to what happened in Postman. If you look over here, look, this is that exact same JSON that is the data for blog post number 1, right? But look what else we have. We have all of this nicely color formatted text, but I just want to specify all it is text. Over here on the left is an HTTP request on line 3. And on the right is an HTTP response, and they're just text documents. There's nothing special about them at all. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So there's an article I'll have you read about the different parts of an HTTP request. But briefly, you have the first line, which is the request line. It's got where am I sending it and what am I doing when I get there. You can have a second line or lines, and these are headers. Headers are key value pairs with information to be used by the web server when the request arrives. So that's what headers are. Again, they're key value pairs. Well, responses actually have headers as well. You can see, look at these key value pairs. This is the date the response was created. This is the type of the text that's being sent back. There's other information here. You don't need to know all these things at all. Now, the other key thing to remember, and this is pretty important, is that you've got, again, this is the request line, the first line. Here's your request headers. And then if you need to send additional information with the request, you do one blank line and then you do a body, some other text. The web server will know, because there's a blank line, that everything after that blank line is the body. And the same thing is true over here in a response. Notice the blank line right here on line 26. All of these are response headers. These are key value pairs with information to be used by the client that receives this response. What's the client that receives this response in our case?
Would that be like just the VS Code that we're using to send it?
Yes. To be more precise, that's a totally right answer. To be more precise, it's the extension called REST client, which is a mini program that can run within VS Code. But yes, it's exactly the right answer, Alexandra. So yeah, this is a direction from that web server out here on the interwebs. Right. It's direction from this website that other people made. And it said, hey, listen, whoever you are, Mr. Client, when you receive this response, here's a bunch of information that you can use about that response. Oh, and here's a blank line. And after that is the body that you're going to need. This is the information you asked for. It's a pretty simple protocol. It's locate a specific machine, locate the thing on that machine that you want to do something with, tell the machine what to do with it, and give it any other additional information it needs. That's a request. And when the response comes back, it's, hey, Mr. Client, here's a bunch of information about the request you're about to get. And if there's any other actual information, here it is. The only other thing about a response that's really important is the first line. This is called the response line or the status line. There's 3 pieces of information here that are helpful. This says, hey, Mr. Client, here's your response that you asked for. I want to tell you a couple of things. I created this using the protocol version 1.1 of HTTP. So if you want to analyze it, you need to use that protocol to analyze it. 2, this is an actual numeric code indicating how successful was I, the web server, at accomplishing what you asked me to do. There's lots of status codes. I'll give you an article to read about those as well. And then following the status code is an English language word that can also be used to get that status information. One of the ones we're all used to seeing is a status code of 404, and the English language data with it is file not found, right? So response has the response line, any headers, an empty line, and the body. That's what requests have. I mean, responses have the status line, any headers, an empty line, and then the body of the response. There's a lot more to the specification, but honestly, unless you have a very specific use case you're trying to debug, that's about all you really need to know at entry level. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, now here's why we're getting into all that. There's some magic that happens when we send this request in. Somehow, the programmers at JSON placeholder.typeofcode.com, they know that if they receive something that has this exact path in it, posts/1, they somehow know that that means to look up in the database for the collection of blog posts and find the one with an ID of 1. Well, you're the creator now. You get to make the website that will do that. And the type of website that will do that kind of thing is called an API. That's what we're talking about at the end of last week's class. Application Program Interface. You're going to make the API. You're going to make something that will be able to scan through the request, find the information telling both the path to the resource and what do I want to do with that resource. And it'll get it done. You get to make the magic happen. Cool?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's expand on this a little bit. One thing to know is when you use a browser and you type in, let me copy this for a second, show you some, it's not magic, but just show you something. Go ahead and copy that whole section I have highlighted right there, okay?
Okay.
Go to a browser, give yourself an empty tab. And up here in the address bar, which is this empty spot here, if you paste that in and hit enter, notice that you get back that exact same response body. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what this tells you is actually something kind of interesting. What verb did this browser program called Chrome use?
A GET request?
Absolutely. And that's what it does by default. Because you're asking for you're specifying what to do. This also tells you if you want the browser to do any other verb, you gotta have a program to make that happen. Because if it's typed up here, it's just a get. All right, now let's look at some of the other verbs. Let's say that we want to update a post. You see this title on blog post 1? It's this lorem ipsum right here, right?
Yeah.
Let's say we want to change that. Well, the type of verb that will do that is called a put. Now, again, I'll give you an article to look at all of these, right? But if you want to change an existing resource, you can use a put verb. Let's figure out if we can make that happen. First, let's go to some of the guide here. This is how to get a resource. This is how to list all resources. We'll look at creating one in a moment. Updating. Good. So here's an example. It says, this is the URL to use, but you use a different verb. You use a verb put. So first, let's change that in our nice little helpful darn Zoom controls. And close this. Let's give ourselves a comment. And we're going to say update an existing blog post. So first, we're going to do the verb. In this case, like I said, the verb is put. And it says to go to the, if we want to change blog post number 1, to put the exact same URL. So go ahead and put that in.
Okay.
And we can specify what version of HTTP we want to use. Now we need to give it the information to use to update it. And that's in the body. Now remember, to tell the web server what part of this request is the body, you need to have an empty line. So you'll hit enter, and then we'll put our body. Let's go back to that documentation. And it says, your body is going to have key value pairs of whatever you want to update. Well, we want to update the title. So let's try this. Let's make a JSON object. So you give yourself 2 curly brackets. And we'll put a key value pair there of body, lowercase. And we want it to say new. Oh, no, sorry. It was not body. We want to change the title. So instead of that big long thing, we want to say new title. Now, there's some additional information that we ought to think about sending to the web server. We have this nice little, any questions about this little chunk right here?
No.
Okay, that's basically saying, hey, listen, find blog post number 1 and make it so that the title property for that object has this new value. Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
The thing that isn't here is letting the web server know what format this text is in. We know that it's JSON because we're pretty familiar with JSON and we wrote it. You need to let the web server know that the body that it's receiving is text, because that's all it can receive is text. It's text formatted as JSON. Well, we have this whole thing called headers. Give yourselves another line, give yourself another line here. We're going to put a header, which is called content type. And it's called application/JSON. This is a built-in type, all according to the HTTP protocol. It's got lots of different types of content they can receive. Video files, graphics files, text files of all kinds of sorts of formatted text, a bunch of things. This is saying to the web server, because remember, everything we're making here on line 10 through 15, this entire chunk of text will be received by the web server. And so we need to tell the web server what this part of the text it's receiving is formatted as. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, I think this will work, but if not, we'll get an error back. Go ahead and click the send. Yep, it's upset. So notice the status line on the response. The status code is a 500, and the English language message with it, the status message, is internal server error. That doesn't tell us a lot, but look at the body of the response. It's all this text right here. Unexpected token T in JSON. There's something wrong with that format right there. I think we need single quotes around it. Let's try that. Go and click send. Nope, it didn't like the single quote there either. All right, so we're formatting our JSON wrong, and that's on me, but that's syntax, whatever. We're gonna look it up. So just look it up. That's what the interwebs are for. This is a really, really bad article. Ah, W3 Schools, our friend. Ah, double quotes. I knew that. See if that'll work. Nope, still mad.
I think you're missing a double quote at the end of the word title, the first one.
I am. You rock. Hey, look at that. All right, so now we get a response back. Again, the first line is the status line. It's a 200. That means I successfully did what you asked me to. Now here, the thing we asked is totally different than what we did with this request. Here, we located a specific resource, the blog post with the ID of 1, and the verb, or also called an HTTP method, we specified was put, which means please update the resource if you find it. Further, we said, oh, I'm going to send you some content you can use to do that put method. And here's the actual content. What we got back was, hey, I did that. That went okay. Here's a bunch of headers that'll tell you more information. But I also, just to be friendly, it could have been just a 200 okay. But to be friendly, I'm also sending a body back. It's this little JSON that says, hey, this is the title for blog post 1 now. That's kind of friendly. That's kind of nice. Now, even that part only happens because the programmers at the JSONplaceholder.typicode.com website make that occur. They made it so that the response that came back had this body right here. And they created the content of that body. And nothing happens automatically for you. Now, there are tools you can use to make a lot of that easier, but you've got to specify these things. Questions so far?
No.
Okay. Why don't we create a blog post? So, create a new blog post. What do you think the verb is going to be here? Now, if you don't know, it's fine. I wouldn't
Is
expect
it post?
Yeah. Absolutely. And then what do you think the URL is going to be, like the path to the resource? We know that this part is going to be the same. So copy that part. Just the, the protocol and the domain. What do you think goes here in terms of the path?
Would it still be post?
It is, but that's all it is. It's saying, hey, listen, the type of resource that I want you to do this verb with is a post resource. Because you're not asking for something to be done with an existing resource, you don't specify an existing resource. You want to create one, so there is no identifier for it yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And again, the behavior that we're about to take advantage of creating a new blog post only works because the programmers at the other end of this bad boy at JSON placeholder made it so it'll work that way. All right, so now let's specify our version of HTTP protocol. And if we're going to create one, we need a body, which is going to contain the information for the new blog post. What format do we want to write that body in? It's going to be text. All this is text. What are we going to format that text as?
JSON.
Absolutely. Now, yourselves a tape, content type of application, JavaScript. One thing kind of interesting, by the way, it doesn't have to be JSON. 10 years ago, it would have much more commonly been XML, extensible markup language. Whole separate subject. But as long as it's formatted in a specified way, and as long as the destination computer knows what that format looks like, then it can read through the text and pull out the parts it needs. All right, so if it's going to be JSON, let's give ourselves some key value pairs. What do we need to specify here? Let's go back to the documentation. This is up here on creating a resource. It says we need to use a post verb, which we're doing. It says to send it to the path posts. Everything after the domain is called the path. So the path is called posts. And we need to specify three things: title, body, and who are we? So let's do a title. My favorite foods. And then body. Definitely not Brussels sprouts, because they're awful. And then it said we need a user ID. Let's make sure we get the name exactly right. User ID with a capital I. Okay. And then it's just a number. We'll just use user ID 1. We don't know what all the users are. This should create a new blog post. Let's send it. Now look at this. Here's our status line. And it's a slightly different status code and status code message. It says, hey, you wanted a resource created. The kind of resource we wanted to create was a post resource, a blog post. And hey, I successfully did that for you. Now, again, we could have just left it at that, but the programmers over there also are really kind. They told us the ID for our new blog post. I was pretty friendly to them. Did you get the same response, by the way?
No, I got like just an empty bracket in the 404 response.
Okay, good. So let's go and share your screen. Now, remember that we're trying to do
Oh wait, I think I
yeah,
messed this part
yeah,
up.
there's a bunch, and on line 19 there's a bunch of double pasting.
Oh geez. Just read it.
Now before you change it, just for greater understanding, let's talk about why it said 404 not found. This entire system of the HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, is built around the concept of doing things to things. Now, it sounds super vague, right? But it's built around performing HTTP methods, post, put, patch, get, performing HTTP methods on resources, doing things to resources. So you got a status message back that said not found. More precisely, it means, hey, I couldn't even find the resource. That's what's not found. The resource that you want, I couldn't find. Now, if you look on line 19, everything after the first .com slash is the resource. So you told it you were looking for a resource of JSON placeholder.typicode.com/posts. And it couldn't find a resource like that. Why? Because the programmers at the other end, that's not something they're looking for. They're looking for a single word. They're looking for the word posts. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I figured you knew that, but especially for people looking at this later, that status right there will relate to the resource you want to do something with. So if it says not found, it means I couldn't find the resource you told me to look for and then do something with. All right, so go ahead and delete all that bad boy. Awesome. And now run it. See if we can create a blog post. Good job. Okay. So again, there's a lot to this if you want to get really deep in it, but we've covered honestly the fundamentals. All we're doing with HTTP requests is we're using some sort of a computer program capable of sending these text documents called HTTP requests over the internet to a specified machine. It's called a client. It's also called a user agent. We discussed that term a few months ago. So we use a program, a user agent, that can take these text documents, HTTP requests, and send them to the right place. Well, now let's build the place they get sent to, the API. Before we do that, we need to talk a little bit about what kind of things we would want to let people use our API for. So I'm going to go ahead and take over. And we're actually just going to use a little text doc here and just start talking about making an API for, so we would say, what types of resources will it let people work with? Let's just keep it really simple and let's just do products, because that's what we've been doing, what we did before with our really janky JavaScript program. It's going to work with products. All right, what does a product look like? Well, let's say, let's write an example product in JSON. We have one of these, don't we? Right now on our computers, we have an example product in JSON. We have 5 of them in a text file. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Good. So let's go ahead and grab here in data and dbcopy.txt. We'll just grab this top one. We'll put it here. Look at that. Now, by the way, have you ever used Notepad++?
No.
Are you on a Windows machine?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's amazing. It's text editor, but it's got lots of extra features. I have one in here. I'm going to highlight this, and I have a little plugin called JS format. Look at that. It formatted it nice and pretty. So this is an example of what we want a product to look like. Okay, good. So now let's say, what can a user do to those resources? CRUD. We want people to create, read, update, and delete products. Good. That's simple. And finally, we're going to say, okay, what does the API look like? In other words, how should a user format their HTTP requests?
Also, your screen's not being shared.
I didn't know that.
Sorry.
Thanks. All right. So here's our example. Oh yeah, and to review this Notepad++ thing, which is so cool. I had this all on one line because I pasted it from this document, dbcopy.txt. And when I highlighted it, I have an extension here, a plugin called JS tool, and the JS format, and it turned it into this nicely formatted JavaScript or JSON. All right, good. So we want people to be able to do CRUD operations on products, okay? When we say what does an API look like, what we mean is how should a user format their HTTP requests? Well, what do people need to know in order to create a request? They need to know the HTTP protocol. They need to know the domain, that's web server address. And they need to know the verb to use. And they need to know path to resource. Why do I say those four things? Because that's what we made here. Here's the protocol to use. Here's the domain. Here's the path to the resource. And here's the verb. So they need to know that. They also need to know any headers. We have to tell them this. Anybody who wants to use our API has to be told precisely how to request that we do work for them. Because if it isn't formatted the right way, we won't know how to do what they want us to do. And finally, we also might need a body. So let's start to actually make a little teeny table. Let's have some of this information. Well, we are going to do HTTP. And then what's our domain? Well, this is going to be something we run locally. So it'll be the local host. And now let's start to document these other ones. A verb. And then a path. And then any headers. And then a body example. So let's do create, read, update, delete. Let's say they want to create something. What's the verb that you would use to create a resource?
Post.
Awesome. We get to decide what the path is. Now, all this is, and just pause for a moment for anybody watching this in the future. What I'm about to say is supremely important. Understanding it well will solve many of the issues you're trying to handle in learning about APIs. This is ultra important. All the path is a pattern of text that's unique, that identifies an exact resource. It's just text, and we use it to match. If what the text is that the browser sends to our web server matches what we're looking for, now we can locate the correct resource. All it is text that we need to match, that our users of the API need to match. And we're responsible for specifying that. I'm going to choose a common convention. A common convention would be to have text that is API, and then the name of the resource we care about. Here it's products. Singular or plural, it's fine. We get to choose. So that again is just text that the consumers of our API have to match. All right. If they're going to post, then the headers, we need them to do a content type. Application / JSON. And what does it look like? Let's do an example. Well, here's our example right here. Look at that. This is a perfect example of what it looks like. Except, do they need to tell us the ID if they're creating?
No.
Exactly. So I'm going to take this. Let's just type it all out. Here's my curly brackets. I always put my ending curly bracket if I'm doing this manually. All on one line, it would be price, 10, and then on another line, SKU, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, same line, name, and we'll call this toaster. Quantity, 5. I did 25 up there, whatever. And then description. And that's it. I think we can get this all in one line if I go back. Here. That's kind of readable here. So this is kind of friendly. This is telling someone, hey, if you want to create a new product in our database, then if you send it to this web address, and if it includes this verb post, and you include a path with this exact text, and if you specify that the body that we're receiving is in JSON, and you give us properly formatted JSON with these key value pairs, then we'll create a product for you in our database. Make sense? Okay. So what we're documenting here is our API. Let's do another one. Let's do one. We did create. Let's do read. What's the verb for reading?
Get.
Absolutely. Now, what are our options here, do you think?
You'd get by like the ID.
Yep.
Of the
Or get
product.
all, huh?
Yeah.
There's also other things you can do like searching and that kind of stuff. We're not going to add that complexity in yet. Let's just do get all. So it would be API / products, and that's all. And do we need any body with this?
No.
Then we don't need to specify a content type,
Correct.
and we're done. Let's say we want to get a single one. Now we need to specify the ID of the product we want, right?
Yeah.
Do we need to send a body?
No.
Nope. We're done. All right. So now we've done create. We've done read. What about update? What's the verb for update?
Put.
Absolutely. What do we need to specify here in the path?
The ID of the product you're updating.
Absolutely. Do we need to send a body?
You would, right? Because you have to at least add whatever it is you're updating.
Absolutely. And let's copy that part because it's going to be written in JSON. Pardon me, in JSON. What would be an example of what you need to send?
You could do like price and then 50 if you're just updating that.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. So we've done create, 2 different versions of read, then update, and now delete. Do you know that verb? Which HTTP verb?
Is it still just delete?
Yep. Genius. What do you think for our path?
It would be like the specific IDs, like API products and then ID.
Absolutely. Do you think we need to send a body?
No.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Excellent. Now, the only thing that's missing from this chart here is what should they expect in the response? That would be kind of friendly. So we could actually, let's make this a little easier to read here. Let's hit enter right here. And enter, enter. So create, read, update, delete. Sorry. A little bit easier to read. Okay. And then you could put up here response. It's a horrible chart because my monitor isn't wide enough. Let me, for readability's sake, share my other monitor. Okay, good. If it works on the create, what do you think we want to send back to them? We get to decide.
Would it just be like the status 200 and then like, okay.
That would be good. Now, what did our example do? Let's do the create and see what it did. I did it on the other screen. It gave us a 201 created because we made a new resource. But it also gave us a body of the ID. Now, why is that valuable? Any thoughts?
So that you know it created what you're expecting it to create.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't the 201 created tell us that? Why is the ID valuable?
You know what the new idea is. You could like work with it for other requests.
High five to the computer. That's exactly it. Like, we're kind of lost if we don't have that ID. Like, we made it, let's say it was an order. We made a new order, and now we need to do various things with that order. We've got to have the ID for that order to add new products to it, to change the address, all that kind of stuff, right? So what you're looking at right here is kind of interesting, because we as programmers are making the deliberate choice to let people know the ID of the newly created resource. We are allowing people who use our services to have a little bit of a window into the state of what's going on down in our computer programs and our database. It's one thing to let them know, hey, yes, we created a resource for you. It's a lot more valuable for them to know, hey, we created the resource, and the state of that resource is that it has a specific ID number. State is, what is the current value of the properties of a thing? Well, one of the properties of this newly created product, in our case, is it has an ID. So just a little bit of food for thought on why that's valuable. All right, so what kind of response do you think people would get on the list all?
It'd be
What
like
do you think we should tell
everything.
them? Yeah, if they're listing everything, what if it is successful, what should they get back?
Would that just be like the 200 and then the okay? And then also, would you want to list everything back to them?
Absolutely. Now, this one, you wouldn't document a giant list of it. I would just put JSON and it would be an array of objects. Like that. Just to let them know what kind of format it's going to come back in. How do we know it looks like that? Well, let's do a get all posts. We haven't made that yet. Let's go to the top here and do get all blog posts. This is just an example. We don't have to do it this way, but what would this look like? How would you create the request for this?
Get, and then the HTTPS.
Where do I stop? Sorry.
You'd stop at posts.
Genius. Okay, and then I can do my version. I'm gonna send that. And I got a 200 okay. And look, it's oh, I did the formatting wrong. I'm glad we did this. It's an array of JavaScript objects. All right, good. So yeah, I think the way you could do that is, can you see my screen now still?
Yeah.
All right, so let's reverse that. So there's my square brackets. Sorry, square brackets, and inside I've got curly brackets. And in there I would do ellipsis, dot, dot, dot. So that's what you would expect back. You get a 200 okay back as your status, and you get an array of JavaScript objects. I think that's pretty good documentation, because they know what the structure of each object is going to look like. They know it's right here. All right, good. Now, what about here?
Would it be the same, but just with the specific ID, like all the information for that ID product?
Yeah, for the single one. So we do a 200
Yeah.
okay. And then it wouldn't be an array. It would simply be the content. We're not going to repaste all of this right here because they know what it looks like. All right. Now, what about a put? If they're going to, this is for updating an existing resource. What's the right status code for an update? Now, again, we're at the end. We'll go over some articles to read on the Mozilla Developer Network about details on this. But let's just look at what happens on when we did our put. We just got a 200 okay, and we also got the ID of the new one. So what do you think we should have? Let's have our 200 okay.
Yeah.
And then what do we want to have here in JSON?
Would we want to put like the price and then 50 like they did with the title?
Absolutely. They did
A title and ID.
yeah,
looks
yeah.
like.
So
yeah.
the price and ID. Good. Now, by the way, this is how you design an API. And you know, I wear this stupid t-shirt all the time. It's not stupid, it's one of my favorite shirts. It says weeks of coding can save you hours of planning. It's one of my favorite nerd shirts. All this planning, this documentation, this thinking ahead of time that we're doing is going to make it so much easier when we're actually building our API, because we're designing its behavior before we've written a single line of code. And that's the way you want to do it. All right, so our price, we reset it to 50. And then we would do the ID of it, I think is what we said, yeah. And let's say it was ID of 1. Yeah, it was, because we sent it to product 1. So this tells them what to expect back. And we're the ones that are responsible for making sure they get that back. So we're going to come back to this chart we're making over and over again while we're building our API. All right, so how about on delete? What do you think we should send back as a response?
Would that also be 200 okay? Because like if it's successful, and then
Let's see what they're doing. I think it is. We'll do a delete. Let's see if we haven't done a delete yet. Either. So let's build a delete. Delete a blog post. Well, we already know that the verb is going to be delete. Let's grab our URL here, and we're going to delete blog post 1 or blog post 1. That should do it right there, right? We've got our verb. We've got the protocol. We have the domain. Right there, there's the domain. And we have the path to the specific resource we want to delete. So let's send that. And what they're doing is they're sending a 200 OK back, like you said, and they're sending an empty JavaScript object back. Okay, I like that. That's fine. So let's go back. So they said it's a 200 OK and an empty JavaScript object. Okay. That's our documentation for what we're going to build. Okay. All right. So let's talk about how to build this thing. Now, the computer program we're going to build is designed to sit there and continuously listen, like, like a catcher in baseball, sitting there waiting for the ball to arrive, right? It's just a listener. So the computer program we're going to build needs to sit on a web server and have an open connection to the outside environment, to the internet, all the time, and be listening for web requests. And if it receives a web request and it's formatted properly, then it'll do the required action. Now, working with the text documents that you and I have been talking about all night, these HTTP requests and the responses isn't very friendly. I want you to understand what they are and how they're structured, but in practice, it's much easier to work with an actual object in a computer program. You could have a request object, which has, again, for JavaScript, objects are just collections of key value pairs. You could have a key called method, and that value would be post or put or patch or delete or whatever. You could have a key called path, and that could be API/products/1 or whatever, right? It could have a key called body, and the value of it would be whatever JSON was sent in. Doing that, taking this text that's received by the web server, by our computer program, and turning it into an in-memory object makes it much easier to grab the parts out of it that we want. Otherwise, we're literally searching through a text document, and that's a giant pain in the butt. So the good news is we don't have to create a program that can read through a request and turn it into a JavaScript object. It might be an interesting exercise, and frankly, it would be a perfectly valid piece of homework for me to give. But we don't even need to do that. The good news is there's hundreds and thousands of little libraries out there that already do that for us. What we're going to start using is a framework that includes that functionality. Now, do you recall the difference between a library and a framework? It's been a while. Okay. A library is just a collection of pre-made code that is a bunch of functions that you can use if you want to. That's what a library is. Hey, here's a big giant JavaScript file, or whatever language you're writing in. Here's a big giant JavaScript file. And what it is a big collection of JavaScript functions, and you can use them if you want. Just call on them. That's a library. A framework is a fully functioning computer program that does a lot of things. And it might have a bunch of built-in functions, but it's a running program that is ready for you to then customize to your needs. So there's a framework for building APIs. It's really popular. It's called Express. It's really popular in the Node world, in the JavaScript world. Now, there are lots of others, and people have lots of opinions about different frameworks and blah, blah, blah. I use it because it's really easy to learn these subjects. And once you know it, choosing a different one to use based on your preference or what your company uses, it's much easier to understand that new version or that new alternative. So we're going to use this framework called Express. And we're going to use it to receive requests and scan through them for the path and the verb. And based on the path and the verb, we're going to write the code that will create a new product down in the database, or get a specific product, or get all products, or edit an update an existing product, or delete a product. We're going to write that code. And the simplicity of what we need to do is grab the incoming request that someone made using our documentation, grab the verb from it, grab the path, and then send all of that, the verb and the path, send that information to a specific function that can hit the database and do what we want. And we already have all those skills. We know now how to use, for example, this object relational mapper called Sequelize to reach out into the database and do what we want to. We built those things. You did a great job on that, actually. So the part we're going to learn is how to install this framework called Express, and how to do what's called routing, reading through the incoming request to get the verb and the path. And based on those two pieces of information, routing this incoming request to a specific function that does the work for us that we want done. And then in that work includes creating the response and sending it back with the right status code, with the right body. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so your homework is to actually just study on Express a little bit. Let me show you, there's a pretty decent little tutorial on it that I saw. I want to find that again. There we go. All right. I'm going to put this in homework, or going to put it in the channel. Homework. All right, let me share my screen and show you what I'm talking about. All right. This is the actual website for Express.js. These are the people that created it, right? And this is a very simple way to create an application. Now, the terminology here is super important. What you're creating is an actual app, a running program, because remember, Express is a framework. It is a fully functioning application. So once you install it, then when you start your computer program, the thing you're starting is an Express application. That actually happens right here on line 2. This variable called app is actually a running computer program. It's a running Express app. And then you can do a bunch of stuff with it. So go and do this tutorial and read any other kind of information. You go to installing, you install it, right? And then you'll do the hello world. You can keep on reading through there if you want, but that's the minimum I want you to do, okay?
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Any questions?
No.
All right, cool. End off a little bit early, and I will see you in 2 days.
All right. Thank you. Have a good
Awesome.
night.
Absolutely. Good job. Have a great night.